All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas Podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ, up there in
New York City.
Fangraphs Jon Tayler is here. Are you wearing a Major League t-shirt? What is that?
Yes, I am. From the good folks at Baseballism.
There you go.
A quality merchandise provider.
I like it. What's your favorite baseball shirt?
Oof, that's a tough one. Probably either the Santurce Cangrejeros. Wow, why did that take so much work? Shirt that I got from Ebbets Field, or that's a good one. I mean, it's not a baseball shirt, but I got a shirt from Amoeba Music, the legendary Bay Area and Los Angeles-based music retailer that sells records and CDs and DVDs and everything. During the pandemic, that had the Amoeba Music, the Dodgers logo, but with Amoeba Music. Really big fan of that one. But I think my favorite baseball shirt, the one I've kept for forever and that I will never ever let go of, my Nick Johnson Washington Nationals player jersey that I bought probably in 2006, 2005, whenever it was exactly he was on the Nationals. That is my go-to shirt when I go to a Nationals game, if I ever go to a Nationals game, which I haven't actually done in quite a bit. But for me, the Nationals are always going to be the team of guys. Like they were, from their very inception, because I was 18 when the Nationals moved from Montreal to DC. So I got to be there for their inaugural season, is when I was a high school senior. And it was just guys. It was guys all the way down, because obviously that was, the last Expos teams were not particularly star-studded. The first several years of the Nationals were not particularly star-studded. So you really got used to having guys like Nick Johnson to root for, or Ryan Church, or, the immortal Chiron Martis, Chad Cordero. I could do this for a while. It's really kind of sad.
Where's David Roth when you need him?
Yeah, this is, at some point, you got to get Roth on here and just have a full hour of, let's just talk about guys, and, just name your guys. But that's probably my favorite baseball shirt that I own. In terms of overall stuff, my favorite baseball thing that I probably own is either my Hall of Fame Pedro Martinez jersey, or a 2004 Gray Road Red Sox Nomar Garciaparra jersey that I got 6 months before he was traded, and that I still wear when I get an opportunity. I wore it to a Red Sox White Sox game 2 years ago now. That was really fun. So yeah, I think those are my favorites. I'm always on the lookout for more baseball tees, though. I have to basically tell myself not to go on Ebbets Field pretty much ever, because $200 will just disappear before I even realize it. But I'm a big fan of theirs in particular. I really like the historical baseball stuff that they do. But yeah, I got the little Major League. You always love the Major League thing. I wore this to at least, I've worn this to at least one baseball game, and the looks you get from people when they recognize it are always a lot of fun.
There you go.
I would also recommend any Guardians fans out there, if I were a Guardians fan, and I know obviously the name change somewhat complicates a little bit, but 100% chance I have either a Rick Vaughn jersey, a Pedro Serrano jersey, or a what was the name of the character played by Chelsea Ross? Eddie Harris, the junk baller, the spitballer. Definitely one of those, I think. Or the problem I think with Willie Mays Hayes is you have to get the entire name on the back. Because as we know, hit like Mays, run like Hayes. But yeah, I think this one's way up there in terms of the conversation.
There you go. Speaking of conversation, Jon Tayler.
Yes.
We got to kick things off with our favorite segment now. During the
Take Graphs.
It's time for Take Graphs, Jon Tayler. What is your Take Graphs take of the week? This is so much fun. I love this.
I love that we just get this opportunity just to be perpetually oh, this is a problem. This is a thing. Because there's part of me that wants to be the Orioles are the best team in the AL East and just walk away from the mic and not say anything more. But
run with this, John. The Orioles are the best team in the AL East.
I can't even run with it because the pitching's not there, and that's the biggest problem for them right now. The hitting is there, the bullpen is very good. Yennier Cano, who is one of the pieces they got in the Jorge Lopez trade, and who Ben Clemens wrote a brief piece about on Fangraphs for Wednesday. Super so far. Obviously, Felix Bautista, the awesome closer they have, but I mean, when there's just too much Kyle Gibson right now for me to feel comfortable with the Orioles. Too much like Tyler Wells, who didn't pitch poorly today against the Red Sox. He held them to 2 runs in 5 2/3 against a pretty good offense. I don't know how most. I mean, you'd have to ask Orioles fans, I think, but I know if I were an Orioles fan, I don't feel too great about a rotation that is the way it is, particularly with, and I'm not saying this is going to be the case forever, but particularly with Grayson Rodriguez looking the way he has, which is to say, fine overall. All right, here's my take. I think the Twins are going to win the AL Central in a walk. I don't think this is close.
Ooh.
And I don't say that so much because I think the Twins are a juggernaut. They're not. They're fine. The rest of the AL Central is a garbage fire. Cleveland barely above it, and then 3 teams in Chicago, Kansas City, and Detroit are abominably bad.
I think Kansas City's already been Kansas City and Oakland have already been nominated for postseason contention.
By our odds, the postseason odds for Royals are 0.6%. The only teams lower are the Nationals, A's, Reds, and Rockies. Can you guess which of those teams has already achieved a 0.0% chance of making the postseason?
Oakland.
The Rockies.
Oh!
The Colorado Rockies at 8-18, 6 games back in the National League West, projected to finish 62 and 100. We have officially given 0.0% chance of making a postseason.
Mission accomplished.
With regards to Nationals and the A's, 0.1 isn't a whole lot better. It's basically, it's for all intents and purposes, a rounding error. But officially, the dreaded 00, the F, the D minus, as it were. Well, I guess the 0.1 is the D minus, aka the gentleman's F. The straight F just goes to the Rockies. But to get back to my AL Central thing, look, if I want to expand this take, even to just I think the Twins are the best team in the AL Central and it's not even close, just abolish the AL Central at this point. What is the point of this division? Seriously, what is the point of this division? There are fully 2. We'll start from the top. I'll just do it. The Twins are a legitimate team. They've got a good lineup, a good pitching staff, a pretty okay bullpen. They finally beat the Yankees in a season series for the first time in 22 years.
Mm-hmm. Not finally. A postseason series, though.
Not a postseason series. Just the regular season, the 6 games that those teams play, or 7, or I guess it varies year to year. They finally finished 500 or better in a regular season series against the Yankees. Finally. It finally happened. I think they're a legitimately good team, and I think, we'll see what the season holds for them. But that's a team where once you throw them into the playoff mix, you're like, okay, you can maybe make some noise. We talk about the Guardians on and off, and I just continually vacillate between them being just pointless, their existence being pointless, and then toward the end of last year when they got super hot, they're like, okay, this team's actually kind of cool. They're doing something interesting and different. No, man, it's just more of the same. This team just can't hit. They just cannot hit. There is no offense to be found on the Guardians. And while part of that is, there's some early slumps, I think, just on the part of, I guess Jose Ramirez he hasn't been his usual self. Let's just call it that. But regardless, you look at the Guardians right now, there are 3 regulars with a WRC plus above 100. I'm sorry, there are 2 regulars with a WRC plus above 100. Jose Ramirez and Mike Zunino. Look, I don't think that Steven Kwan and Andres Jimenez and Josh Bell and maybe Josh Naylor, I'm not 100% sure on that one, are going to be below league average hitters for the rest of the season. That doesn't strike me as super likely. But even if they get above that, and I think Ahmed Rosario is probably close-ish to league average, so that's another decent bat. But even if you get, let's bump them all up to a 110 WRC plus, you're still dealing with a hole in center field with Miles Straw, a hole in right field with Oscar Gonzalez, a hole. I don't expect Mike Zunino. I don't think anyone else expects Mike Zunino to keep up a 142 WRC plus going forward. That's probably not going to happen. What's funny about this too is this is a team where I think if you would have asked people in advance, hey, which team do you think is going to benefit the most from the absence of defensive shifts and teams being forced to play straight up on the infield, you probably would have guessed, well, the team that makes a ton of contact, aka the Cleveland Guardians, the team that has made its bones on contact. And granted, that is still the case. When you look at our plate discipline stats in particular, sorted by team, By contact rate, Cleveland is tied for second in the majors with Toronto. Here's another fun quiz. Who is number one in the major leagues in contact rate as of the stats from Wednesday morning? So not including today's games.
Brewers?
Nope. I'll give you one more guess because I really don't think there's any chance you get this because I wouldn't have guessed it in 1,000 years.
Oh, so they're bad.
Yes.
I'm going to say Reds.
The Washington Nationals.
Oh.
The best contact rate in the major leagues, and on top of that, the lowest swinging strike rate in the major leagues. But still, Cleveland is top three, is second in contact rate, third in swinging strike rate. Arizona also very high up there, which is kind of fun. But I think, obviously contact rate doesn't tell everything because I think there are obviously some particular things you have to look at. In particular, this little thing we call isolated power, which is just a neat little stat that basically adds up all your extra base hits and, essentially gives you an average base number a la batting average or OBP to mark essentially how much power you have. Cleveland ranks 27th in that category with a 114 batting average, with a 114 isolated power. By the way, fun fact, Washington, number one in contact, dead last in isolated power. There's a lot of singles and slap hitting going on in DC. Similarly, obviously, it is still early in the season, presumably a little too early to start making any real hay of this. But by barrel rate, Cleveland is second to last in the majors at 4%. Washington, again, dead last. By hard hit rate, Cleveland is 27th in the majors at 33.3%. By just simple sheer batting average, Cleveland, and this is where Cleveland should be excelling. They have a 228 batting average right now, 24th in the majors. And this is where they're supposed to excel. Again, this is not a team where you look at the lineup and you go, oh, but the power is going to be there because these guys are all big sluggers. Aside from Ramirez and Bell and, again, maybe Naylor, this is not a power hitting team. They have to make their bones on stuff like on making contact and on making quality contact. And some of this, I think, you look at batting average on balls in play. Cleveland is 26 in the league at 274. I think the league average right now is somewhere around 290. So they're a little unlucky in that regard, but they're also not hitting the ball hard at all. Again, when you those barrel and hard hit rate stats I just quoted, bottom 5 in the league in both categories. The isolated power, bottom, third worst in the league or second worst. I've already forgotten which it was. That's not something, you can't have a viable, successful offense with those kinds of numbers. You just can't do it. It doesn't matter how much contact you make. And again, Cleveland is second in the majors in contact. This isn't some early season thing where they're swinging and missing a lot. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's just not quality contact right now.
Yeah.
And if that's going to be the case, if the Cleveland offense is once again going to be one of the weaker ones in the majors and kind of susceptible essentially to a ton of batting average on balls and play luck, then the pitching staff's really going to need to step up to shoulder the load. And so far, that hasn't really happened. You've got Shane Bieber, who has not looked very good so far, in part because his slider has just not been quite the same pitch it was last year. And given the fact he's throwing about 90 miles an hour right now, there's not really anything else for him. He's got a 3.23 ERA, but his xFIP, which is based almost entirely on walks, strikeouts, home runs, and all that fun stuff, up to 4.26. And the rest of that rotation is not very much better. I mean, with a small caveat that I'll get to in a minute with, the rookies they have in the rotation, Zach Plesac and Cal Quantrill, perfectly fine back of the rotation guys, but again, guys you cannot really trust in anything more than that kind of situation. Not guys you want starting playoff games. Similarly, Aaron Civale, who's currently injured, not a dude who strikes out a lot. These are not strikeout pitchers that the Cleveland Guardians develop. The counter to that is the two guys they just recently called up, Logan Allen and Tanner Bibby. Tanner Bibby, I believe is how it's pronounced. It's either Bibby or Bibby.
Yeah, I haven't heard it out loud.
I think Bibby is actually the pronunciation. Bibby is funnier, but regardless. Those two, Bibby just made his debut on Wednesday against Colorado and looked very good. Logan Allen made his debut over the weekend against Miami and looked very good. I imagine those two guys are going to get rotation spots going forward. They're also, Cleveland has a ton of good pitching in its system. So there is, I think, there is definitely some upside there. But again, that pitching staff needs to be borderline perfect to carry an offense like this. And that's really hard to do when 40% of your rotation is Zach Plesac and Cal Quantrill and is also just subject to the mercies of batting average on balls in play. And when Shane Bieber, who amazingly is only 28 years old, but throws basically like Zach Greinke at this point, he does not really have the arsenal at this point that kind of lets him dance through trouble. He's not a big strikeout swing and miss guy anymore until and unless that slider is working for him. So I am and I think understandably so, skeptical of the Cleveland Guardians. And with that being the case, then again, what is the point of the rest of this division? I could spend, I feel like, an hour just talking about how the White Sox are an absolute disaster at this point.
Which we saw coming before the year.
Yes, and I will take as many victory laps as I can on this, because not to say like it's, oh, I'm so smart that to see that a team that was really bad last year was going to be really bad again, but it's really clear no one in Chicago has any idea what they're doing. It's really clear Rick Hahn doesn't know what he's doing, or at the very least is so hamstrung by whatever machinations Jerry Reinsdorf is up to, by whatever payroll constraints that he has imposed upon the team, that there is effectively no way for them to do any better in this. And to some degree, you can trace what's gone wrong in Chicago to those original decisions 7 or so years ago, the big teardown trades of Chris Sale, of Adam Eaton, where they dismantled that team and were like, okay, we're going to restart, fresh, bunch of prospects. That just hasn't worked out. And some of that is just, the poor dumb luck of stuff like, acquiring Yoan Moncada, who at the time was the number one prospect in the game, a dude who just cannot stay healthy. Similarly, Michael Kopech, who was one of the best pitching prospects in baseball when he was with Boston, turns into a guy who similarly cannot stay healthy and whose stuff is just not consistent enough for him to be competitive on a regular basis. The Adam Eaton trade obviously landed them Lucas Giolito, but someone who has kind of wavered the last 2 seasons, and I think has been a really big reason why Chicago has struggled so badly. The Lance Lynn trade, where again, they were building back up. They gave up Dane Dunning. Not someone I think they're necessarily going to miss, but Lynn just has not been there for them this season. Looks like he's a guy who's starting to hit the cliff. And this is a team, as we've kind of hammered on over and over and over again, just does not have internal depth. So when these problems start cropping up, when Moncada invariably goes on the IL, when Eloy Jimenez, who already has had his injury this year and is probably due for another at some point, goes on the injured list, when Giolito and Lynn are struggling badly, when Reynaldo Lopez turns out not to be actually the closer you want, there are just no options for replacements. Then you're just good. Then you're doing stuff like, well, let's put Gavin Sheets in right field. How is that working out so far? Very poorly. And for as much as you can say, oh, it's still early, there's plenty of time to turn it around, especially, 2 things I think are important here. One is that, as my colleague Dan Szymborski pointed out on Twitter earlier today, it's still early, but those 19 losses now, or 18 losses for Chicago, those are already baked in. So if this, even if you still think, oh, the White Sox are a 90-win team from this point forward, they're going to end up at 83 wins. They have to play at a 95-plus win pace to be comfortably above 500 going forward.
Yeah.
Does this look at like a team that's going to do that? No. Given the problems they have, given how barren their farm system is, given how allergic they have been to making signings or trades to bolster the major league roster. And that's the other thing. This is not a White Sox front office that has shown any inclination to make the kind of impact moves at the deadline or really at any other point during the year to make a team better. So those games already count, and they have already counted in a really big, really bad way. The other part of this is, with the schedule now somewhat rebalanced, Chicago doesn't have a ton of games, still to come against Kansas City or Detroit to fatten up, I think you can make a pretty convincing argument both those teams are worse than Chicago. Maybe Detroit is about the same, but either way, those are the teams that, if you're a White Sox fan, you're like, okay, well, we can beat up on them, we can make up some ground, and Cleveland doesn't look very good. You're not going to get those 19 games a year against each of those guys anymore. I don't know what it ended up being. Maybe it's just 12 or 13 now. I think it depends on the individual team and division. But that room is not there to be made up. And granted, yeah, that means you're going to get more games against the A's, more games against the Nationals, more games against the Reds. You find the bad teams in other divisions. But the White Sox are one of those bad teams right now. They got all close to no hit by Jose Barrios, who has been a walking train wreck, to mix metaphors, for the last 2 seasons. Today against, in that series finale against Toronto, 11 of the last 12 White Sox hitters struck out. That's past bad talent, bad decision-making, whatever. That's a team openly quitting in late April. That's really, really bad. So in my mind, it's like, what is the point of the AL Central doing the rest of this? I don't even want to get into Kansas City, which clearly doesn't know. Look at that Royals lineup and tell me that team knows what it's doing with regards to roster construction. Please try to tell me. Similarly with Detroit, the vibes off that team are just one endless who cares anymore. You can almost feel the wave of apathy coming off AJ Hinch in the dugout, where I think he has finally fundamentally realized this is a go-nowhere job with a go-nowhere team. Nothing matters anymore. When you've got Javi Baez forgetting how many outs there are multiple times, I don't know what you do with that at a certain point, you know? And the shame with Detroit is there's some legit talent there, but as we've gone over a bunch of times, they've been really, really bad at developing it. And so now they're in this period, I think similar, like Chicago's in this place because it tore down, misdeveloped its players, and then didn't do the requisite free agency and trade moves to bolster the roster, and that didn't work out. Detroit is in that stage now where it's like, okay, we did the teardown, we got the prospects, and they're not working. And they're also heading for that similar place of, but we don't really want to spend money to try to bring in free agents to fix this because that's going to be really hard. The only solution here is to build from the ground up again, essentially. It's going to be a long time before Detroit is competitive, and I think a real contender. And at this rate, I'm not really seeing any reason to think Chicago's going to get there any faster, you know? Like, the window for this team is if not closed, about an inch wide at this point. You know, I'm not sure where the optimism comes from for the White Sox. You know, if you're out there and you're thinking to yourself, oh, the White Sox can still win the Central, I bless you, man. I don't know where that optimism is coming from, but as y'all tend to say down there, bless your heart, man. That's some beautiful optimism right there.
And I think it's one of those things too. Like, you know how some fan bases are just like, just kill us.
Yeah.
Like, just in this. Like, I don't think they... Not them personally, but
there's a word for this, and it's called Mets fans. It's just one perpetual, someone please put my head under a dump truck and run it over.
But it's not even for White Sox fans. I think it's more for, I mean, what's stuck in my memory is just the White Sox fans on Twitter that I follow all collectively, like, losing their minds. Who was in right field when he just loses it in the
Gavin
sun?
Sheets. It was Gavin Sheets.
And just, that's still where we are, and they're just like, let's move on.
It's like
they're ready to move on. They're ready to just clean house again. They're like, why are we doing this?
They've just been on a treadmill. Nothing changes. Nothing changes with this franchise, with this team. I can't imagine being a White Sox fan. It must feel like you're going crazy the whole time. Like you've seen, how many times have you seen Gavin Sheets, who is just a perfectly fine hitter. I know, this is not a knock on him personally, but has been demonstrated over and over and over again is not a capable outfielder. Yeah. A guy who's only really supposed to be standing out there in case of emergencies, and yet it feels like 2 times a week the White Sox are just shoving him out into right field and being like, go with God. Like, that must drive you nuts. To the point where I feel like I've seen a fair number of White Sox fans on Twitter reach that stage of, I just don't care anymore. Because clearly no one in charge of the team cares. Why should I? I think that sense of like, please kill me, this team is killing me, that's a very Phillies vibe. And as I say that, they just gave up a grand slam to J.P. Crawford, so Phillies fans are very much in their please kill me moments. But I just, with the White Sox, I feel like at a certain point, like, you just tune them out, because the vibes there are just all kinds of wrong, and I for one, like, again, like, their playoff odds aren't 0%, but right now they're sitting at 6.2%. Those are the worst playoff odds of any American League team, not named the Royals, Tigers, or A's.
Man.
Like, if you're a White Sox fan, you didn't expect to come into this, you didn't expect before April is even out to be like, we're the 4th worst team in the American League. And it's not even close. It's not remotely close. So yeah, my take for the week: abolish the AL Central. The hell with this. Enough already. Enough of these teams that are bad, too? Except for Minnesota.
Do you know what's worse too?
The fact that there's still like 130 games left for the White Sox.
Well, that, but also the Twins are going to win this division and get the Yankees in a first or second round series.
But they got the monkey off their back. Now it's time to get the bigger monkey off their back.
No, don't
look. How do you get a monkey off your back? One limb at a time. So, look, I'm here for the Twins breaking their curse. I'm here for them finally frickin' winning a playoff series. For the good people of Minnesota, as Joe Biden would say, Minnesota. You have to be so online to get there. I'm so sorry to everyone listening to this who is not online to the brain broken degree of like when you hear Minnesota, you just imagine Joe Biden yelling it.
But it's also one of those things you don't know how online you are until certain things like that take you to that certain thing. And you're like, no one else understands this, but this is stuff that I've just stored in my brain until the end of time.
It's frightening how Twitter has worn particular grooves in my brain, like the ruts of a wheel, that just this dirty water just kind of flows down and into a central processing area or something. I don't know how the brain works. Point of this being, No more AL Central. We as a society have evolved beyond the need for the American League Central. If you want my expanded take on that, get rid of divisions entirely at this point. Like I noted, and this is part of something I noted to you over text a couple days ago. Not the case now because Boston lost today, but I do love this. But either way, every team in the American League East is 500 or better. Every single team. One team in the AL Central is 500 or better. Like, what are we doing? What is the point of that? Get rid of it. Get it out of here. Cut it. Throw it out. It's garbage. Tired of it. The Red Sox are dead last in the AL East. 8 games behind Tampa Bay. Their playoff odds are 3 times what the White Sox are. What do you do with that? Like, if you're a White Sox fan, what do you even do with that? You cry. You cry and you quietly see if the Cubs are taking applications for fans. I don't know. Which has got to be the other galling thing if you're a White Sox fan. The Cubs are actually kind of good this year. Maybe not good, but they're not an embarrassment.
Yeah.
You know, I still think the Cubs finish around 500, and that's where our projections have them too. But that's a team that actually feels like it's on the up and up to a certain degree. That things are actually returning to some level of competency and contention and normalcy. Whereas everything on the South side just feels like you're living in an abandoned house, you know? I do feel for White Sox fans. I know a good number of them on Twitter. They're good people. You know, I'm friends with them. But sheesh, what a franchise! Like, and it's just the thing I think especially about Nothing Ever Changes is every year Rick Hahn just gets to keep running this team. Every year Jerry Reinsdorf is still there, just farting around. And I feel bad too for Pedro Grifol, their manager. Like I can't say or speak as to whether or not this is a job that is for him. Really, I haven't watched nearly enough White Sox baseball to be able to tell you how he is as a manager, but regardless, that's a horrible opening gig to get. Is like, take this team that is just rancid all the way around and try to make it better. Are we going to give you help to do that? Absolutely not. Here's Andrew Benintendi. That's it. Good luck. Here's Mike Clevenger. He throws 2 pitches. Good luck.
Go White Sox.
Go White Sox.
Is Madison Bumgarner a Hall of Famer for you, John?
No.
Okay.
I can see. No, I mean, you really have to. You really either have to stretch what his playoff contributions meant, and not just playoff contributions, but specifically one particular postseason where he just turned into Walter Johnson, which admittedly was very cool. Or you have to be an enormous Hall guy, like. And granted, I'm not the type to be like, if there's a borderline Hall player, let him in. Who fucking cares at a certain point, Like if I'm trying to think of which guys got voted in where they had kind of a borderline reputation. Like honestly, I feel like every Hall of Famer who's been voted in by the writers, and I want to make that a really important caveat, has been a worthy and deserving Hall of Famer. I don't think the writers in the last really even 10 years or so have strayed particularly far. I think they've been too slow in recognizing some guys, but I think on the whole, the guys they have voted for, you look at and you go, yeah, that feels right. And granted, I think there's some guys in that group, Larry Walker, Scott Rowland, where if you're not as like, either if you don't care about or not as plugged into the advanced metrics on those guys, you probably have a moment where you're like, Scott Rowland is a Hall of Famer now? But at the same time, yeah, Scott Rowland was one of the best defensive third basemen of his generation, was a great hitter, had a long and very good career. Similarly, Larry Walker, even with Coors Field, even take Coors Field entirely out of it, was a great hitter and a great defensive outfielder. Those are guys where you look at the numbers and it illuminates, oh, hey, this guy was actually way better than I thought. With Bumgarner, you look at the numbers and they all basically just say the same thing. Not enough. You look at, if you're at all a baseball reference person, probably know that Baseball Reference on their player pages includes what they like to call the Hall of Fame statistics, which is a number of stats and indexes that just keep track of basically a pitcher's or player's Hall of Fame worthiness, essentially. That's maybe not the right word. Bumgarner is just way short on everything. By Black Ink, which measures, I want to get the exact thing here. Black Ink gives you points for league leading, for times you led the league in some category or another. The average Hall of Famer has 40 points on their Black Ink score. Bumgarner's at 4. Gray Ink, which includes top 10 appearances as well as leading, average Hall of Famer is at 185. Bumgarner is 113, so he's way off the pace there. The Hall of Fame monitor, which basically charts stuff like more or less, for the big round numbers, or for things like if you won an MVP award, if you win a Gold Glove, if you won a World Series, you get bonus points for that. Average Hall of Famer in the Hall of Fame honor score, which is a Bill James invention, 100, Bumgarner 59, and that's with that ludicrous postseason included. And then the big one for me always, Jay Jaffe's JAWS system, which uses wins above replacement to measure Hall of Famers and Hall of Fame candidates against each other and against who's already in the Hall. The average Hall of Fame pitcher, and granted, this is one of the most hard to crack groups in, not much hard to crack, but this is a group of guys who are, the numbers here are enormous. The average Hall of Fame pitcher, 73 career wins above replacement, and 50 wins above replacement in what Jay likes to call a 7-year peak. So take the best 7 years of their career, add them all up essentially to get their peak score, and then a JAWS score, which is basically him tweaking the numbers to get a kind of overall kind of wins above replacement style number. 61.4 for the average Hall of Fame pitcher. Bumgarner, just above 37 career wins above replacement. So he's barely, he's just exactly half the Hall of Fame average. His 7-year peak, 30 WAR, which is almost 20 points off the 7-year peak for an average Hall of Famer. 33.8 JAWS, which is 30 points shy of the average Hall of Famer in JAWS. And that includes S-JAWS too, which is Jay's attempt to adjust JAWS for pitchers in our era, given that pitchers now no longer routinely throw 250 plus innings or win 20 games on the regular. So, and that I think is really the thing that Bumgarner had going for him the most, that if he were to have become a Hall of Famer, it would have been because he turned into one of those dudes who just pitched forever and was just going to give you 200 innings year in and year out. That's not the case anymore. And not the case anymore. I mean, I don't necessarily know it's like a health thing. I'm sure if you gave Bumgarner enough starts, he would probably give you 200 innings. The problem is they're 200 really crappy innings at this point. Yeah. We saw what he did in Arizona, not just this year where he was terrible, but the year before where he was terrible, the year before that where he was terrible. Really, 2020 is about the only stretch of good pitching he's been able to do in Arizona. And I'm almost to the point where I don't even think that season even really counts to a certain degree. It was so messed up and weird. Regardless, the Bumgarner in Arizona is... Weirdly, he is both not the same Bumgarner that we knew from San Francisco, but he is exactly the same Bumgarner we knew from San Francisco. Because nothing has actually changed about what he does. His approach is the same. His arsenal is the same. He is exactly the same pitcher in that regard, which is why he is no longer the old Madison Bumgarner, because that stuff doesn't work anymore. Yeah. And that, I think, more than anything else, is why Bumgarner is not going to get the opportunity to continue adding. Well, I'm sure some team out there, especially given that the Diamondbacks are on the hook for for the $30-some million he's still owed for the next 2 seasons. Some team will pick him up for the major league minimum, some team that needs some pitching help somewhere, and give him a shot and see what he's got. But until and unless he changes something, tries to do something different, changes his approach, changes his arsenal, instead of just kind of sticking his head in the sand and just trying to plow forward with the mediocre stuff he has been getting lit up with, you're not going to get any better. And I think what ultimately... It's a very different path to get there, and they're very different pitchers ultimately, but it's pretty much the same outcome as Felix Hernandez, a guy who shoved and shoved and shoved and grinded away for over a decade with the Mariners. Lots of innings, lots of batters faced, was transcendent at his peak, better than Bumgarner at his peak. But by the time 32, 33 rolled around, he was effectively done as a major league pitcher because all that arm was completely spent. And I think Bumgarner is pretty much in the same place. So I think if you're, I don't think that Bumgarner will get on a Hall of Fame ballot, I'm sure. I think he will be a very quick one and done. Because this is not even a guy where it's like an Andy Pettitte where you can sit around and go, oh, but there's a long career and a lot of accolades. And I think the closest thing you tie is, oh, they were both postseason warriors. Pettitte did it over and over and over again. That's no knock on Bumgarner whatsoever. The 3 World Series runs that the Giants made, he was central to all of them. He is the singular almost reason that they won the World Series in 2014. He will never pay for a drink in San Francisco again, despite the fact he will never want to go to San Francisco again because of all the George Soros created crime and whatever, because that's Madison Bumgarner. But his Hall of Fame argument rests entirely on October 2014. That's pretty much it. And for as much as a postseason resume can help your Hall of Fame chances, I think of Pettitte sticking on the ballot. I think of David Ortiz, becoming a first ballot Hall of Famer. I think, and you'd have to talk to the voters, but I'm pretty sure this played a large part for them in, being so central to the Red Sox winning in 2004 and then again in 2013. For Bumgarner, it's just that 1 month, really. I think he will get some courtesy votes from some Giants beats when the time comes, and maybe from some other particularly old school guys who love the way he was give me the ball and get out of my way type. But No, Madison Bumgarner, unfortunately, too short a career, not a long enough of a peak. And like I said, I don't think his career is over. I think he'll find a home somewhere else. But I think the days of Madison Bumgarner being an impact starter are long gone, and I think any real chance of him being a Hall of Famer is long gone too.
But his peak was some of the best peak pitching performances you'll see ever.
Yes, from 2014 to 2016, because I pulled those numbers up because that's arguably his peak. I'm just going to read the stats out. 99 starts, 12 complete games, 5 shutouts, 662 innings, which amounts to, I'm just going to divide that up. That amounts to 7 innings a turn, more or less. A 2.88 ERA, 704 strikeouts, only 136 walks. It's less than 2 walks per 9. An ERA plus of 131, a WHIP barely over 1.04, and in terms of baseball reference wins above replacement over that period of time, 13 and a half wins over that period, or 4.5 wins a year. For those 3 seasons, he was arguably one of the 5 best starters in baseball. And included in that run, of course, is that 2014 postseason where he was, again, the second coming of Walter Johnson. That's so cool. And that is something where, regardless of what happens with his career going forward, and regardless of whether or not he will not be a Hall of Famer, but regardless of what happens with that going forward, if you grew up or if you were a baseball fan during that period of time, you're always going to remember that. Madison Bumgarner, it doesn't matter what happens for you going forward. He will always have October 2014, one of the single greatest postseason performances in the entirety of the history of the sport, maybe the greatest ever from a pitcher. It'll never be done again. That's simply put, it will never be replicated. It will never happen again. I can feel very confident saying that what Madison Bumgarner did that October will never happen again in Major League Baseball, at least the way Major League Baseball operates now and presumably for the near future. It's really something special. And I think that the weirdness of like the whole Hall of Fame debate is sometimes in stuff like that where it's like, well, why don't we have room for these guys who were so great for this period of time or who were emblematic or iconic in this way? I think that all that points to is, man, the Hall of Fame is really hard to get into. Like, those are the best of 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 the best, sir. Like, there have been thousands of Major League players. Only a small fraction of them have been good enough to get into the Hall of Fame. So that should, I think, if anything, that should really tell you how crazy the Hall of Fame is. That Madison Bumgarner, who a lot of people in the future are going to remember and be like, man, that guy was great, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Not nearly good enough to get into the Hall of Fame. That should really say something about how hard it is to get in the Hall of Fame.
And again, that's okay. He had the peak. Giants fans will be revered in San Francisco forever.
Like, his number. They'll retire his number. He'll be invited to every single anniversary for the rest of time. Like, he'll go into their Ring of Honor or whatever it is they have. Like, he'll go into whatever his small North Carolina town's like Sports Hall of Fame is, where it'll literally just be him and probably a rodeo guy. But like, I'm sure he'll enjoy, being able to make rodeo a bigger part of his life now. The man formerly known as Mason Saunders,
doing the whole rodeo thing a few weeks ago, John. You get sore. It's a tough
sport. I've seen it, and it looks like one of those things where I'm like, I cannot fathom why a human being would strap themselves to an angry animal and try to see how long they can stay on top of it. It's one of those things that is so uniquely
There's a reason
American.
You don't see older men on the horses. Or the bulls or whatever. There's a reason it's a young man's game, and it's not even for young men.
No, it's for the criminally insane. But that's the thing. And I guess like that's a good point. Not everyone's career has to be the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Most guys do not have most guys don't even have close to Hall of Fame careers. Most guys don't have
that kind of October dominance and October just brilliance that Madison had.
No,
that's just a rarity.
Most guys, he gets to live off that forever. And I think, if you asked him today, like, hey man, would you be happy with your career as it has turned out? I mean, I can't speak for Bumgarner because he's a legendary red ass. So there's a good chance he'd say, no man, I hate this. I'm sure he feels pretty good about where his career has turned out. Again, 3 World Series rings and the World Series MVP in 2014. You're never, ever going to hear someone talk about postseason individual performances without mentioning him. He will be there forever. I feel weird talking about him in the past tense, like, oh, he's gone now, but it's like...
But he might be, because remember with Tim Lincecum and I think we like to believe that...
Matt Cain, too.
Yeah, you think you can just...
Felix,
we expect these guys to just evolve. Like, it's something you see in basketball, too, where it's like, why can't you just become Vince Carter and age the way Vince did, where he lost his athleticism, but he turned it into shooting, and he
or become one of those older dudes who turns themselves into a 3-and-D guy or something.
Right. that not everyone can do that, and it's just not reality. Like most guys like would kill for just that peak that Madison had, but like it's so much easier said than okay, now change everything about what made you one of the best pitchers in baseball for years. And that's how you're going to stay in this game. Some guys make that adjustment, some don't. Roy Halladay didn't make that adjustment. There are guys, like you said, Felix Hernandez didn't make that. It's so much more difficult than just you lost your velocity. All right, make some changes. Go be Zach Greinke for the next 7 years.
And that's the thing. And I think you make a good point, too. It's like, not only is it not easy, but again, you're telling a guy, hey, the way you've done it literally since you started this sport, essentially, the thing that made you famous and rich and you know, all of these things, change it entirely. I think there has to be some element of pride to that. And I don't fault Madison Bumgarner for being like, I am going to be who I am. I mean, his very last start as a Diamondback, he's up there cursing out Wilson Contreras for being mad that he didn't get a good swing off.
Hold on, like, can I have a baby take here?
Yes.
It brings me no joy to admit this, John.
Oh, no.
I watched it, and I was like, Madison's got a point. Now, Madison went over the top. That would have annoyed me as a pitcher. That would have annoyed me because it wasn't a big moment. It was something where I'm like, all right, it's not that big. Like, it was a little much. We're still moving here.
I think I do agree with that.
Yelling at him, though? No, I wouldn't have done that.
I think where Bumgarner perpetually loses people is how virulent the reaction is.
Yes, it's over the top. Like, you can get annoyed. I would just be like, I would give a look. Like, I'd be like, what are we doing?
And that's the thing. Like, and it always puts him in a position to get stunted on.
Yes.
Like, Max Muncy, like the eternal one is Max Muncy telling him to go get it out of the ocean, which is one of the funniest bits of trash talk that baseball's ever created. But even with that Contreras thing, when he got the walk, he flipped the bat, you know? And it's like, hell yeah. It's like, if you're going to talk trash as a pitcher, essentially, and be like, don't give me lip, you're going to get that turned on you. And I think what has hurt Bumgarner in a lot of ways, and what's made this, I think, feel more like the end of a career as opposed to the end of a period of his career, is it's the fact that he is this kind of unpleasant, you know, eyewash red ass, you know, who's just, he seems like the kind of guy you'd really not have a good time having a beer with unless you happen to share his exact politics and worldview. So, and I, you know, I don't, again.
Talking ball with Bum and Huff.
Boy, would that be with special guest star Luke Scott. Yeah, and that's the other unfortunate side of it, is that so many, if not all, with the exception of Muncy, so many of these moments of him losing his mind have come at players of color, which I'm not going to go, like, I'm not going to pretend that, I'm not going to say that Madison Bumgarner is something where I do not know him, but, like, at a certain point, you know, if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck and, you know, eats bread like a duck and flies like a duck and, you know, has a bill like a duck and is a duck, then it's a duck. But yeah, it was a great peak for Madison Bumgarner. It was a great run. And again, like what he did that October for the Giants, never going to happen again.
No. What is your early Fernando Tatis Jr. return thoughts outside of him dancing to folks yelling at him about, chanting about him taking steroids and making it a fun aspect of the Fernando Tatis Jr. experience?
That, no surprises to me. The vibe I've gotten from him throughout has just been that he just is going to be like, you know what, people can say what they want to say, I'm going to still be Fernando Tatis Jr., which is honestly the only real appropriate way, I think, for him to deal with this stuff. It's either
the only way you can, right? And keep your sanity.
Look, it's you gotta, I think when you come back from something like that, you got one of two choices. You can do the whole penitent, head down, like repentant, like I'm so sorry, like I'm gonna tone it down, I'm gonna be quiet as a church mouse, or you're gonna be like, you know what, I made a mistake, I owned up to it, I did my time, I'm back now. You don't like it, shove it. Like, and I think that was always gonna be Tatis. I mean, everything we've seen of his career so far, of the way he plays, the way he carries himself, I think that was the only possible way that things were gonna be for him. You know, as to what we've seen so far, I mean, it's only been, 5 games for him so far, just about that. You know, there's nothing really, I think, to read into his stats. It's been a slow start, but again, it's 5 games. You know, he's only got all of 16 batted ball events. You know, there's nothing really to work with there. I think the big thing is, what does this do in terms of, you know, of San Diego with regards to the roster and the way it's shaped? Because now you have Tatis and Wright. This lineup, obviously, it makes a big impact on this lineup to have him at the top of it, to have it be that much deeper. But, you know, that I think is impact number one, is, you know, having him atop the lineup, having him in right field, no longer having to play Jose Azocar or like guess Brett Sullivan. That can't be right. He is better than the options he was replacing, and that is just an inarguable thing. Otherwise, I truly don't know what there is with Tatis right now. I think what I think is going to be curious to see going forward is how does he produce, and not even so much because of coming off the steroid suspension. I'm not a chemist, a pharmacist, any of that stuff. I can't say specifically as to what the steroid he took was doing, but my guess and understanding is that was a steroid not for performance reasons, but for recovery reasons. That was something he was using to try to get back on the field sooner and to try to, in essentially the same way that players are using human growth hormone to try to speed up their recovery and their and healing from injury. Because the bigger thing I think is how is his wrist going to respond? That wrist has already been operated on twice. Was a huge problem for him in 2022. Obviously, wrist issues are the kind of thing that can be persistent, debilitating, similar along the lines of back issues, So I think the big thing with Tatis going forward is going to be looking at how does that wrist respond, especially after so much time off. I think we got a good sense in AAA that there was nothing seemingly bothering him down there. So that makes me think, he's healthy, he's in good shape. He seems to have his head on right, which I guess is the other thing you look for is, we're getting the good Tatis right now. The one who, when he's getting taunted with steroid chants, is just dancing it off and laughing, Does that stay the case once he's in a slump? Does that stay the case with the Padres or, swimming around 500 at the All-Star break? Is that, still the case when he hears it for the 18th day in a row from some leather lungs in the bleachers? Like, this is a guy who's already shown that one's got to come. I want to bring that one back. This is a guy who's shown already a few times that he has not necessarily been the most mature guy on the field, on or off it. And that, I think, is going to be the really big test, is can he keep his cool? Can he keep his composure? Can he avoid making these mistakes again when there is not just more pressure than ever on him in coming back from a steroid suspension, but also more pressure than ever on the franchise around him. A franchise, by the way, that no longer really seems to treat him as the face of it, which I think is also really important.
Well, they don't have to, because there are bigger names now on
exactly,
the
roster, and this is the thing. Like, Fernando Tatis Jr. before he hurt his wrist and before the steroid suspension was the Padres. He was the bright, shiny future of that franchise. He was the guy that they wanted to build around, the guy who sold the tickets, the guy who was on the face of everything. Now that's not so much the case because they've got Xander Bogaerts, they've got Manny Machado, they've got Josh Hader, they've got Yu Darvish. The Padres have plenty of guys to focus their efforts around who are not coming off both a PED suspension and a broken wrist suffered in a motorcycle accident. I think obviously a lot of that is going to be some internal clubhouse stuff. And it's also worth wondering, what the clubhouse vibe is with Tatis. I don't get the sense that there's anything wrong necessarily. I'd imagine that whatever needed to be hashed out was probably hashed out last year after the suspension dropped. But
I mean, AJ Preller has a good case to always be pissed off at Fernando Tatis Jr.
Sure. And I think that's the other part of it is if Tatis does get off to a slow starter, does struggle this season, it's going to be that much more intense on him because of the fact that a lot of people are going to be like, you had it all in your hands.
Yes.
And you threw it away.
A team that's ready to win now that needed you last year.
And that needs him this year. This Padres team is good without Fernando Tatis, but it's way better with him.
Yep.
And on top of all of that, obviously, is the fact that he already got his money. He already got an enormous bag, which, fair or not, fans are going to hold over him until and unless essentially he wins a World Series.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of
an
MVP. But there's a ton of pressure both on him and the Padres right now for this to work.
Yeah.
So for now, it's obviously it's relative honeymoon stage because it's early, and I don't think, even though the Padres aren't playing particularly well right now.
I'm not worried about the Padres.
No, I don't think anyone necessarily is until and unless they start suffering a lot of injuries or something.
Yeah.
Particularly given that the Dodgers don't look all that great in the NL West either, and that while the Diamondbacks do look good, I don't think that's a team that either.
Fade off. I think the Padres are fine. I'm not really worried about it.
No, but I do think that if things either stay slow or go bad, the pressure is going to be a lot for them to deal with, and so I'm really interested to see how Tatis in particular handles that. Because he's got a bullseye on his back the size of an aircraft carrier. Because that's the thing. For a lot of fans, it doesn't matter what the context was, what the circumstances were, what your background is, any of that stuff. You take PEDs, you get caught, you get suspended, you are public enemy number one going forward. There's always going to be that very vocal subset of fans, both Padres fans and non-Padres fans, who are going to look at him and go, tainted goods, cheater, you're the bad guy now.
Until
And
he
he's
gets
gonna have
traded
to live
to
with
the
that.
Yankees. And then it's just like, yes.
It's kind of amazing he's just doing an A-Rod speed run, essentially.
Right? I was going to say, there's just a lot of A-Rod vibes here.
Which,
Did you
I mean,
know
of course there is.
Codified Baseball had this. Best power speed numbers by active players in their last 162 games. Jon Tayler. Who would you
Yes.
guess are the top 3?
Shohei Ohtani.
Nope.
Does there not enough events? He's awesome.
Yeah. Not enough.
Well, Tatis is probably one of them, considering
He is. Number 1, 47 home runs, 30 stolen bases.
Okay,
in
so
his
they're
last
going by
162.
home run stolen base totals.
Yes.
Okay. Then Julio Rodriguez?
Nope.
No, because he's only had the one season. Ooh, this is tough then. Who hits a lot of home runs and steals a lot of bases? It used to be Mike Trout.
It did used to be Mike Trout, not anymore.
R.I.P. Judge doesn't steal bases really anymore either.
Nope.
Jeez, who are the big power speed guys?
I'll give you a hint. He plays for my team.
Okay, Ronald Acuna, who is on
Ronald
pace to
Acuna.
steal like 95 bases this season.
Exactly. 24 homers, 44 stolen bases.
All right, so who's the third guy?
Kyle Tucker.
Kyle Tucker, the always underrated Kyle Tucker. That makes a lot of sense.
33 homers, 29
Yeah,
stolen
like
bases.
as you just perfectly illustrated, the combination of things he brings to the field, the Fernando
He
Tatis
still has
brings.
MVP upside.
Yes, it is unicorn stuff. It is MVP caliber stuff. And
That's why you
again,
don't trade him. That's why you still let him back in the locker room, and that's why you still let him back.
Yeah, it's why you let him fail his way off
Yes.
the team. I think this is a scenario where if Tatis does something stupid again, then the talk about trading him is going to reach a stupid pitch.
Yeah.
Because at that point, if you're the Padres, you're like, we can't trust this guy anymore. He and I think this is another part of that pressure is he is on some relatively thin ice. You can get busted for steroids once, and people are willing to let it go over time. It can't happen twice. Similarly, you can hurt yourself in a dumb off the field accident. It can't happen twice. You have to demonstrate some level of growth and maturity and change. And I think that Tatis is perfectly capable of it, and there's certainly no sign that he's not doing it. But that's going to be a really big thing for him and the Padres going forward. Is essentially, can they trust him? And he's got to work to earn that trust back.
For sure. But hey, he might. And baseball's more fun when Fernando Tatis Jr. is playing baseball.
Absolutely.
John, Team 1 spotlight. Yankees over the last week. What have you seen? Their playoff odds still at like 70-ish%. The Blue Jays and the Rays look like they're almost postseason locks at this point with the way they're starting things out here.
We've got the Rays at 95%.
Yeah. The Rays might clinch by end of June.
Yeah, without Wednesday's games included. I think they're playing Houston right now. The Yankees at 79%. They beat the crap out of Minnesota today, so that's probably going to go up a tick. And the Blue Jays, who, as we noted, just spent the last 3 games just pushing the White Sox into a puddle, at 81.2%. So we've got the Blue Jays and Yankees basically neck and neck with solid distance behind the Rays. I think, if you're the Yankees, you're not panicking at any point right now, if only because even with the Rays going 20-4 to start the season, you're only 6.5 games behind them. That's not an insurmountable lead by any stretch of the imagination. I think the bigger problem with the Yankees right now is you're seeing a real lack of depth with this roster. And a lot of that is, it feels like this happens every year when Giancarlo Stanton gets hurt, because it's not an if, it's a when at this point. The second he goes down, you look at that lineup and you go, oh, there's not a lot here after the middle half. And then some of this too is, I think, I imagine the Yankees expected Anthony Volpe to get off to a little bit of a better start, and he certainly seems to be picking it up. And again, it's still early. I think he's going to be a great player. This is not something I think the Yankees are panicking about, but I think that has contributed to this overall malaise, today's outburst against the Twins notwithstanding, in terms of offense, because what it looks like right now is, the Yankees toward the back half of last season when they almost blew that division lead in the AL East and didn't really look like a serious contender from really September onward. That lineup was just Aaron Judge and nothing. It was Aaron Judge every night. And Aaron Judge made that work because he had one of the single greatest individual seasons in the history of baseball. But when Aaron Judge is not having one of the single greatest individual seasons in Major League Baseball, that's where the problems start, because this is a Yankees team that has a lot of holes that they only kind of sort of little bit patched over the course of the offseason, We talked all offseason about how the outfield corners in New York, well, left field in particular, because Judge was going to be in right, and they were going to have Harrison Bader in center until Bader hurt himself in spring training. That left field really did not look like they had actually tried to do anything, that they were basically like, well, we'll give it to Orlando to Oswaldo Cabrera and Aaron Hicks and just kind of hope maybe something will work out there. I think similarly with third base, where Josh Donaldson was really not up to the task last season. I think you could have made a really good case in the offseason for moving on from that contract, trying to figure out some other kind of solution. Instead, the idea was
37.
Then that's the thing. Like, this is not, it's one thing if Josh Donaldson had a bad season at 29. You're like, well, he's 29. He'll be fine.
Yeah.
36-year-old Josh Donaldson having a bad season is one of those like big blaring red alarm lights where it's like, like, and yet the Yankees didn't really do anything in terms of either replacing him, which I admit probably would not have been the easiest thing to do, but even in terms of just getting some better depth, then okay, well, we'll just give it to Oswald Peraza and Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. Like that is not really a serious.
Who all have not hit.
I think some of that too was the belief that DJ LeMahieu, when healthy, was going to be the DJ LeMahieu he had been during the first few years in New York as opposed to last year. Jury is still out on that, I think, especially because LeMahieu, similarly, a guy who obviously he's not Josh Donaldson old, and he didn't have a Josh Donaldson level terrible season, but DJ LeMahieu is no spring chicken. He's 34 years old.
He's someone you want DHing every day.
Yeah, he's not a guy
you want to protect in bubble wrap.
He's a great hitter. He has a 145 WRC plus this season. He's been fantastic, but again, not really a guy I think you feel comfortable having out there all the time.
Right.
And again, this lineup has great hitters. Judge is Judge. Gleyber Torres has been very good. Anthony Rizzo has been very good. LeMahieu's been very good. The problem
is, be nice, John?
What's that?
Giancarlo Stanton ever being healthy.
That would be really great, wouldn't it? If you're a Yankees fan,
never going to be healthy.
But that's the thing, like, after those guys, after that top five of Judge, Rizzo, Stanton, Torres, and LeMahieu, and I guess eventually I think you can add Volpe to that list because he is improving. It's a whole lot of nothing. It's a whole lot of Jose Trevino. It's a whole lot of Oswaldo Cabrera. It's a whole lot, weirdly right now, of Franchi Cordero and Willie Calhoun, which I can't begin to understand how the Yankees ended up in that position. And I think similarly, this is something I've carped about with the Red Sox, where it just doesn't feel like there are ever any better internal options. There aren't really better internal lineup options here.
Yeah.
Like you look at what the Yankees have in the you look at what they have on the injured list. Bader obviously will be he can't be worse effectively than what the Yankees are running out there right now, but Harrison Bader is not a season saver.
No.
He's a stabilizer, but he's not turn seasons around. Stanton, I just don't know what you can expect at this point, aside from 110 games where he is just routinely impacted by injury. And beyond that, like, you look at what they have in AAA, there's not really, I mean, maybe a guy like Andres Chaparro or a guy like Jake Bowers, older, or Chaparro's only 24, but Bowers is 27 and a half, not non-prospects to a certain degree who might be able to provide a quick immediate impact. But the actual real impact prospect guys are still a couple years away. Everson Pereira, Austin Wells, Trace Sweeney, Jason Dominguez. Those guys are in Double-A right now, and they're all going to be the theoretical core of the next great Yankees team, or the next, I guess not the next great, the continually great Yankees team. I don't know, but those guys are not there yet. Whatever improvements are going to come for this Yankees team, they have to come from outside. And I think when you look at what the Yankees are right now, I think the main question is, why didn't they do more last offseason? I know the Judge thing was top of the list, top of the priorities, and they got it done. And I know the Carlos Rodon signing, even though he's hurt, I really love that signing for the Yankees. And I think he's going to be he's going to make a huge impact when he comes back off the injured list, assuming everything goes okay with him. And you never want to say that just for sure for an arm injury, but it doesn't, at least we haven't heard anything to the effect of Rodon is in serious trouble or something. It all just seems like they feel pretty good about him coming back, at least relatively soon. But that was really it in terms of what the Yankees did this offseason. And that and some kind of minor bullpen shuffling. It does make you wonder, like, whether or not there just needed to be more work done. And I think, especially if you're a Yankees fan, you're probably a little worried too that the now main mechanism to add to this lineup, if it needs to be added to, is at the trade deadline, where Brian Cashman really struggles. Where, especially you look at last year's deals for Frankie Montas, for Scott Efros, and the Bader one I think has worked out okay so far, if only because Jordan Montgomery I don't think would have been a real difference maker on this team. Those deals have really come back to hurt the Yankees. In what they gave up and in terms of what they got in return. And I don't know how comfortable you feel as a Yankees fan with the thought of the best way for this team to get help is at the trade deadline, where Cashman has gotten himself pantsed over and over again the last few years. There has not really been I'm not even recall off the top of my head the last really good Yankees deadline trade that worked out well for them. And granted, most of that was just been pitching, like Lance Lynn, Sonny Gray, Montas, guys like that. But those did not work out particularly well.
Bader didn't go bad.
Bader didn't go bad, and he almost single-handedly got them to the ALCS. Him and a couple other guys.
Just need him healthy. I think that one's fine. You can do that.
But the other part of it too is, and I think we've talked about this before. It's like, well, if you're looking at, at the very least, like, who are the guys you can expect to be available at the deadline, who are going to be potential impact hitters. What does that look like right now? With the free agent class next year for hitters is barren. It's just Shohei Ohtani. Ian Happ just signed an extension with the Cubs. That was a popular Yankees fan target. Brian Reynolds just signed his extension with the Pirates. I think that was probably the guy most everyone would have expected to be moved this deadline, assuming that the Pirates weren't in it. And let's be entirely honest, the Pirates are probably... I love the Pirates. I love what they're doing. I just don't think they're a deep contender. I think they're one of those teams that's going to kind of sputter out a little toward the end. But regardless, you're not... there is not at the very least an immediate obvious guy on the trade market, I think, when you look at either free agents to be or, tear down teams looking to move a guy, where you can feel like, oh, we're going to get something quality out of this. I mean, I think at this point you're looking at like Will Myers, Jock Peterson. I think Jock Peterson would actually be a great addition for the Yankees, particularly with the short porch. But there's just not, those are, we'll see. I mean, we'll see. There's a lot of season to go. I just think if you're a Yankees fan, you're probably not feeling super great about how kind of thin this lineup feels right now, and that all it took was one injury to Giancarlo Stanton to take this Yankees lineup from dangerous to, oh, this is not a lot of fun right now.
I also could see just like Severino and Rodon being back and then just winning a bunch of games with some.
I think the reality is that the Yankees were always kind of primed to be the team that pitching wins for them because of the fact that they have Cole, Severino, Rodon. When healthy, they'll have Cole, Rodon, Severino, Nestor Cortez, and we'll see. We'll see who that fifth starter ends up being. Maybe Domingo Germán, maybe Clark Schmidt, maybe
hopefully not Clark Schmidt based on what
probably not Clark Schmidt based on the way he's pitched, but they do have
your fifth guy, and just like that's
you can live
a good
with
spot
that.
to be in.
You can absolutely live with that.
On the flip side, though, the flippity flop, Jon Tayler, as we wrap up here on this edition of Take Graphs here on the Chase Thomas podcast. The Pittsburgh Pirates, John, they paid somebody. Brad Reynolds got paid.
The biggest contract they've ever handed out, topping the one they gave to Jason Kendall like 25 years ago.
That's incredible.
I know. Isn't it something?
It only took Brian demanding he not be traded for 2.5 years.
It took him demanding not to be traded and then hitting 900 to start the season for the Pirates to be like, okay, fine, I guess you're worth keeping around. No, it's really good for Pittsburgh.
A McNutt situation. It's McNutty.
it is. Boy, Pirates fans, they're the ones who are
very not family friendly here.
I was gonna do it, and now it's ruined. I was gonna be like. I'll spare the listeners out there, but no bones about it. This is a really good thing for Pittsburgh, and not just in what it does in keeping Reynolds around, who I don't think is anyone's idea of a franchise player, but is certainly a really good corner outfielder. Although I think he's been playing center in Pittsburgh, but regardless, a really good outfielder.
Nate McLeod is somewhere smiling.
Yeah. Just the pure optics of it, of just being like, for once, we're keeping the dude. Mm-hmm. For once, we are going to build around the guy. I think it almost feels fitting that this happens the year Andrew McCutchen comes back, because I think that was really the last time the Pirates made that investment in. We're giving this guy the money he deserves, and then they let him, and then they traded him away anyway, 6 years later. But purely for again, I don't think this Pirates team ultimately is a contender, and I don't feel like that's a crazy thing to say. I know they're off to a really, really good start. They're leading the NL
in what
Central.
Context?
I don't think that they're going to be, I don't think they're going to win the division.
But could you see them in the division race kind of a la Baltimore last year?
I think so. I guess I should say when I say contender, I don't think they're a realistic playoff team, and I don't think they're a World Series contender, but I do think that, yes, they are capable of staying in the NL Central race and staying in the NL wildcard race, because at the very least, it does look like there's something fundamentally different about what Pittsburgh is doing. This doesn't feel like just kind of a fluky hot start. I think it is for some guys, like a Connor Joe has a batting average on balls in play of 450. That's not going to keep up.
You never know.
You never know if he might just turn into the modern day version of Rogers Hornsby, but without all the racism. It's a lot of racists back in early 20th century baseball. In baseball the whole time. But there are some good signs in Pittsburgh. I think especially when you look at what they've done with their pitchers, in how Mitch Keller looks and how Rancy Contreras looks and how Johan Oviedo looks and how that bullpen has been so good for them so far. I think there's something legitimate there in terms of I can now see this team being a 500-ish team, you know, barring something going absolutely nuts. And again, it's Pittsburgh, not a whole lot of depth, you know, obviously without O'Neill, Cruz, that lowers the ceiling. You know, and this is obviously a team that even with having paid Brian Reynolds is not going to be, I think, out there at the deadline making big blockbuster deals, is not going to be out there this winter, like going, you know, bidding up on Shohei Ohtani, although it'd be really funny if they did. But just purely by the optics of we're off to a great start, the fans are invested, or at least feeling like, hey, there might be something here. We might have something at least decent to watch for the rest of the season, you know?
That's
and
nice.
And they're young guys involved too. It's not just like, oh, we signed a bunch of crappy veterans and they're getting off to a weird good start. No, this is guys you know are going to be there for the long term. In Reynolds, in Jack Sawinski, in Oviedo, in eventually once he gets healthy again, in O'Neill, Cruz. You know, those are the guys you feel good about going forward. So I like a move a lot for Pittsburgh. I think it had to be done both on an on the field level and just for a pure optics franchise level. You know, I don't think this signals any great sea change in the way the Pirates operate. I don't think, again, Bob Nutting is suddenly going to start throwing out, you know, $100 million contracts on the regular. No. I think this is just them correctly reading the tea leaves and going, we need to do this or else the fan base might literally burn the place to the ground. So, and that in that way, you can look at it two ways. You can look at it as a cynical ploy by ownership to keep the fans entertained while not really actually changing anything about the franchise itself. Or the more optimistic view of, well, at least they recognize that it is a good idea to keep good players around and to pay them appropriately. That's a step forward. Maybe
they have young players that are fun. Like, hey, pay Brian Hayes now.
There's a really good farm system in place there.
Like
there's a good farm. There are reasons to be optimistic in Pittsburgh, and that is something.
What helps? The NL Central sucks.
The NL Central is bad. It's really
there's
bad.
A path to them being like.
I mean, the Cardinals are 9-15.
Yeah.
You know, the Reds
the Cubs aren't seriously going for it. The Brewers don't ever want to win the division.
No, the Brewers, and another one of those teams that isn't suddenly going to start making blockbuster deals or handing out tons of big money either. Like,
they'll give you Woodruff.
Here's Brandon Woodruff's broken shoulder.
Yeah.
But I think it's what if more important, I think, than anything else is that if you're a Pirates fan, between Reynolds, the start of the season, the farm system, a bunch of stuff, you actually can feel like there's some optimism going forward for this franchise. For the first time in what feels like probably the Halcyon McCutchen days. You know, this is a franchise that looks like it's at least turning itself in the right direction, even if in the process of doing so, you can kind of still see the outlines of, well, but it's only going to be on Bob Nutting's particular terms, which is to say, you got your $100 million contract, don't get greedy. We ain't doing this again for a bit, you know? This is still the same guy who, when the offseason comes, or the next time he decides to answer a reporter's phone call, is still going to complain about the economics of the game being rigged against the Pirates and small market teams and blah, 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 despite the fact he's a literal billionaire. Like, it doesn't change the long-term direction of the Pirates, I would say, when it comes to that stuff, but it is something that you can feel good about, and I think that does signal that at the very least, they are willing to take advantage of a moment when it's there. Which I think is also important, because if there's one thing that really defined that run in the mid-2010s, when they came so close to, you know, they lost the wild card game twice, when they did win when they beat the Reds in the wild card round, or in the wild card game rather, that they just never made that, they never took that next step. They never got those guys to push them over the edge, to turn them from a really good 96 win team into a juggernaut 102 win team, you know? And, you know, obviously you can't go back and undo that. And again, I don't think Reynolds is a sign that suddenly that's going to be the new day in Pittsburgh. But again, this is a team that stopped trying essentially for like 5 years. It's good to see them start trying again.
For sure. And best stadium in the NL.
Just a great stadium. If you've not been to PNC Park,
yeah.
If you've never been to PNC Park, go, especially now that the Pirates are actually fun and worth watching. A great view, a great layout, great food, cheap. Get your big Iron City tall boy, get yourself some nice seats, stare out at the Pittsburgh skyline. You know, walk across the bridge to and from the game. Really fun experience. Can't recommend PNC Park as a game day experience enough.
There you go. Jon Tayler, Fangraphs.com. Go subscribe if you have not already done so. All that good stuff. All kinds of great content. Their players having a weird one, and you can find out which player is having a weird one by going to Fangraphs.com right now and reading.
I do love that that's one of our headlines. Is player name here is having a weird one. Shouts to Michael Bauman for that one.
That's a good tease. It's a good tease. Go read
It's
it.
a good tease. While we're on Fangraphs, I'd also like to shout out new merchandise available on the site through our partnership with Breaking T, the folks who make pretty much every MLB player in team t-shirt, or at least the non like literal team ones. New t-shirts just dropped with Fangraphs logo, Fangraphs and script, and very cool limited edition run of Fangraphs champion mesh shorts for the spring and summer, so you can show off your pasty white calves to anyone who wants to see them. We got more cool new merch coming that I'm really excited about. The folks at Breaking T have done some really good stuff. So check that out. We'll have a post about it tomorrow. You can go to Breaking T right now. Go to breakingt.com/fangraphs, I believe is the link, for the entire Fangraphs merchandise collection. All very cool stuff there. Highly recommend it if you are a nerd who needs clothing.
There you go. Jon Tayler, always a pleasure, my friend, and I will talk to you next week.